During dinner with her husband, she received a text. "Get up and go. Don't say a word to him. What happened next will leave you breathless." My beautiful family, this is one of the most powerful stories of a woman you will ever hear. A great family, a strong heart, and a wife who refused to break while her husband ended up on his knees begging for her love. Before we begin, I send a prayer your way. May God crown your life with success, surround your home with joy, and grant your soul's deepest desires. Do me a favor, my beautiful family. Smash that like button and comment below, "I am with my brother." Now, let us step into a storm of betrayal, heartbreak, and unstoppable strength. A story you will carry in your heart forever. The distance between them had grown so profound that Journey Queen could taste it in the expensive wine she pretended to sip. Metallic, bitter, like pennies dissolving on her tongue. Across the white tablecloth at Meridian, her husband Elias Thornton carved his dry-aged steak with surgical precision, the knife scraping against bone in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. 35 years old, and she felt ancient, watching this man she'd married when she still believed love meant compromise. The soft jazz couldn't mask what they'd become, two strangers performing dinner theatre for the waitstaff. "Morrison acquisition closes Thursday," Elias said, not looking up. His voice carried that boardroom detachment, the same tone he used to discuss stock portfolios or their mortgage refinancing. When had he stopped using her name? "Partners are pleased with the preliminary numbers." Journey nodded, pushing roasted vegetables around her plate. Her wedding ring clinked against the fork, a sound that once made her smile, now felt like a tiny bell tolling. At 37, Elias still looked good in his expensive suits, still got compliments on his sharp jawline. But his brown eyes had gone cold, somewhere between their second anniversary and now, calculating everything in billable hours. "That's wonderful," she heard herself say, though the words tasted like ash. When had she stopped caring about his victories? When had he stopped sharing anything that mattered? Around them, other couples actually seemed to enjoy each other. At the next table, a woman threw her head back, laughing at something her partner whispered, wine spilling slightly as her shoulders shook with genuine delight. Journey couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. Couldn't remember Elias making her laugh at all. "Been thinking about the Hamptons house," Elias continued, finally meeting her eyes. "Should sell it. Maintenance costs don't justify usage frequency." The Hamptons house, their honeymoon cottage where she'd once imagined children building sandcastles, where she'd dreamed of growing old together on the wraparound porch. Now it was just another line item to liquidate. "If you think that's best." The words slipped out automatically, even as something inside her screamed to fight for that house, for those memories, for anything worth saving. Elias nodded and returned to his meal, matter settled. This was how decisions happened now. He proposed, she acquiesced. Life moved forward with all the warmth of a business transaction. Her phone vibrated against the table. Elias's fork paused midway to his mouth. "Really, Journey?" "During dinner." "Sorry, I thought—" She reached for the phone, planning to silence it quickly, but the message preview stopped her cold. "Emergency at Grandmama's house. She needs you now. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Ailani." Her 29-year-old sister never sent dramatic texts. Ailani had inherited Mama Rose's practical nature. If she said emergency, someone was dying. "I have to go." Journey was already reaching for her purse, hands shaking. "Go where? We haven't finished." "My grandmother. There's an emergency." Elias set down his fork with deliberate slowness. "What kind of emergency?" "I don't know yet, but I have to get to her house." She fumbled with her coat, adrenaline making her clumsy. Mama Rose had raised her after the car accident that killed her parents when she was 12. The thought of losing the woman who'd been her anchor made breathing difficult. "Journey, you're being dramatic. Whatever it is can wait until we finish eating. We made reservations 2 weeks ago." The casual dismissal hit her like ice water. This was the man who'd promised to love and support her through life's storms, now treating her family crisis like an inconvenience threatening his dinner plans. "My grandmother raised me, Elias. If she needs me, nothing else matters." Her voice carried a strength that surprised them both. When had she stopped fighting for what mattered to her? "Fine." He waved his hand dismissively. "I'll handle the check. Try not to let Rose manipulate you into whatever charity project she's dreamed up this time." The cruelty was casual, practiced, dismissing Mama Rose as manipulative, reducing her lifetime of service to charity projects. Journey stared at this man she'd married, searching for any trace of the person who'd once promised to cherish her family as his own. Nothing. Empty brown eyes that saw her as an inconvenience. "Don't wait up," she said quietly, then turned and walked away from their table, away from the suffocating politeness of their dying marriage, toward whatever crisis waited at the house where she'd learned what love actually meant. Rain started as she reached her car, fat drops splashing against the windshield like tears. The drive through the city's darkening streets felt surreal, as if she were escaping from a beautiful prison she'd built around herself, one compromise at a time. Every red light felt like freedom delayed. The old Victorian house glowed warm yellow against the grey evening, its wraparound porch and gingerbread trim welcoming as always. But something felt different as Journey hurried up the front steps, her heels clicking against wet wood. No ambulance, no police cars, so why this crushing dread? She found her spare key under the ceramic frog where it had lived since childhood and let herself into the familiar entryway. Vanilla and cinnamon wrapped around her like a hug, but underneath she smelled something else, the salt of tears. "Mama Rose," she called, dropping her purse on the antique hall table. "In here, baby girl." The beloved voice came from the living room, thick with emotion and exhaustion. Journey found her 89-year-old grandmother seated in her favorite armchair, surrounded by cardboard boxes and scattered photographs. Mama Rose's silver hair was disheveled, her usually immaculate appearance forgotten. Tears streaked down her dark cheeks as she clutched a faded newspaper clipping. "Grandmama, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" Journey knelt beside the chair, taking those familiar hands, hands that had braided her hair, wiped her tears, taught her to cook. "They're tearing it down, baby." Mama Rose's voice broke on the words. "After 30 years, they're destroying everything we built." Tearing what down? Though dread was already pooling in her stomach. The Riverside Community Center. Mama Rose held up the newspaper clipping with trembling fingers. "Some developer bought the whole block, luxury condominiums going up, and our center has to be gone by month's end." The weight of this revelation pressed against Journey's chest like a stone. The Riverside Community Center was Mama Rose's life's work, 30 years of after-school programs for children, meals for seniors, job training for adults, hope for families with nowhere else to turn. More than a building, it was the beating heart of a community. There has to be something. Legal challenges, fundraising. I've tried everything, sweetheart. Mama Rose's shoulders sagged with defeat. Sale completed months ago, before anyone knew what was happening. Developer has all the permits, all the approvals. We're just poor folks who don't matter to the people making decisions. Looking around at the photographs scattered everywhere, Journey saw 30 years of transformed lives. Pictures of children who'd found safety at the center, elderly residents who'd discovered community, families who'd been fed and housed and loved when the world turned away. "Those children need this place," Mama Rose continued, her voice growing stronger despite her tears. "Where will they go after school when their parents work 2 jobs just to keep lights on? Who's going to make sure they have dinner and homework help and someone who believes in their dreams? Holding her grandmother's hands, seeing the devastating impact written across her beloved face, Journey felt something crack open in her chest. The numbness that had characterized her life for years shattered, revealing passion and purpose she'd forgotten she possessed. "We're going to save it," she said with sudden fierce certainty. Mama Rose looked up through her tears, hope flickering in her dark eyes. "How, baby girl? I don't know how to fight people with that kind of money and power." "I don't know yet," Journey admitted, "but I promise you, we're going to find a way. This center is too important to let it disappear without a fight." As she held her grandmother close, feeling the strength and courage that had always defined this remarkable woman, Journey made a silent vow that would change everything. She didn't know that saving the Riverside Community Center would lead her to question every assumption about her life, challenge every compromise she'd made, and ultimately introduce her to a love so profound it would teach her the difference between existing and truly living. All she knew in that moment was that some things were worth fighting for, and perhaps it was time she remembered how to be the woman Mama Rose had raised her to be. Chapter 2. The Gallery of Unexpected Encounters. Journey had always believed that the most important conversations happened in the spaces between words, but she never expected to discover this truth while staring at a painting that transformed a woman's tears into blooming flowers. The morning after her grandmother's devastating news, she sat in her favorite coffee shop with her best friend Aurora Delacroix, watching steam rise from her untouched latte while her mind raced through seemingly impossible solutions. She had called in sick to work, something she never did, because returning to her mundane routine of selecting fabric samples and coordinating furniture deliveries felt absurd when Mama Rose's life's work hung in the balance. "You look like you haven't slept," Aurora observed, her keen art curator's eye missing nothing as she studied Journey's face across the small table. At 33, Aurora possessed the kind of effortless elegance that came from years of moving through gallery openings and cultural events, her auburn hair always perfectly styled, her clothes a careful balance of artistic flair and professional sophistication. "I couldn't stop thinking about the center," Journey admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm cup for comfort. 30 years of helping people gone just like that. How do we fight developers with unlimited resources and political connections? Aurora leaned forward, her green eyes bright with the kind of intensity that had made her one of the city's most respected curators despite her young age. "You don't fight them with their own weapons. You fight them with something they don't understand: heart, community, and the power of art to change minds." "Art?" Journey looked up sharply. "Aurora, this isn't about creating something beautiful to hang on a wall. This is about saving a building that feeds hungry children and provides shelter for homeless families." "Exactly." Aurora's smile carried the confidence of someone who had spent years watching art transform both individuals and communities. "Which is why you need to meet Bruce Brando." The name meant nothing to Journey, though something in Aurora's tone suggested it should. "Who is Bruce Brando?" "Only the most innovative philanthropist in the city," Aurora said, pulling out her phone to scroll through images. "He owns the Brando Gallery downtown, but it's not like any gallery you've ever seen. He specializes in community-focused art that tells real stories about real people. Last year, he helped save a homeless shelter by organizing an exhibition that raised over $200,000 in one night." Journey studied the photos Aurora showed her, images of gallery spaces filled with powerful, emotionally raw artwork that seemed to pulse with authentic human experience. These weren't the sanitized, abstract pieces she associated with high-end galleries. These were works that spoke to struggle and triumph, loss and hope, the kind of art that made viewers feel something profound in their bones. "He sounds like every other wealthy philanthropist who writes checks to ease his conscience," Journey said, though even as the words left her mouth, she recognized the cynicism wasn't entirely fair. The artwork in Aurora's photos suggested someone with deeper motivations than simple tax benefits. "That's exactly what I thought before I met him," Aurora admitted. "But Bruce is different. He grew up in foster care, built his fortune through tech investments, and now he uses art as a bridge between communities that normally never connect. He's not writing checks from some ivory tower. He's in the trenches, working directly with artists and neighborhoods." Despite her skepticism, Journey felt a flutter of hope. "Do you think he would help with the community center?" "There's only one way to find out." Aurora stood and gathered her purse with characteristic decisiveness. "His gallery is 15 minutes from here. Let's go see if he's available." An hour later, Journey found herself standing outside the Brando Gallery in the heart of the city's arts district, second-guessing her impulsive decision to come here. The building itself was understated, a converted warehouse with large windows and a simple black sign bearing the gallery's name in elegant silver letters. Nothing about the exterior suggested the kind of pretentious showmanship she had expected from a millionaire's vanity project. "Stop overthinking," Aurora said, recognizing Journey's hesitation. "The worst thing that happens is he says no, and we're no worse off than we were this morning." Inside, the gallery exceeded every expectation Journey had formed during the drive over. The space was vast and airy, with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors that created an industrial warmth. But it was the artwork that took her breath away. Pieces that told stories of resilience and transformation, of communities finding strength in shared struggle. She paused before a large canvas depicting an elderly woman reading to a group of children in what appeared to be a community center setting. The artist had captured something transcendent in the scene, the way the children's faces turned toward the reader like flowers following the sun, the gentle strength in the woman's hands as she held the book, the sense of sanctuary and possibility that radiated from their gathering. "That's one of my favorites," a voice said behind her, warm and genuine in a way that made her turn immediately. Bruce Brando was nothing like what she had imagined. He stood in the gallery's main corridor, wearing jeans that had seen actual work, a simple grey sweater with paint stains on the sleeves, and canvas sneakers that looked like they had walked through every neighborhood in the city. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it while concentrating on some complex problem, and his blue eyes held the kind of intelligence that came from truly seeing the world rather than simply observing it. "The artist is a woman named Elena Rodriguez," he continued, moving to stand beside Journey in front of the painting. "She grew up in East Valley, spent her afternoons at the community center there after her mother worked double shifts at the hospital. This piece is her tribute to the volunteer who taught her to read, and eventually to believe she could become an artist." "It's beautiful," Journey said, though the word felt inadequate for the emotion the painting evoked. "There's something about the way she captured the connection between them. You can feel the love and hope in that room." Bruce turned to look at her directly, and she felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting to meet someone who understood the power of such moments. That's exactly what Elena was trying to convey. She said she wanted people to understand that community centers aren't just buildings, they're places where futures get written. Aurora stepped forward with her characteristic social grace. "Bruce, I'd like you to meet my dear friend, Journey Queen." "Journey, this is Bruce Brando." "Journey Queen," Bruce repeated, and something in the way he said her name made it sound like music. "That's a beautiful name, strong and distinctive." "Thank you," Journey replied, acutely aware of how his presence seemed to fill the space around them with warmth and possibility. "Aurora tells me you help communities through art. I'm hoping you might be able to help with the situation my grandmother is facing." "I'd be honored to hear about it." Bruce said, his attention completely focused on her in a way that felt both flattering and slightly overwhelming. "Would you like to sit down? I have a small office in the back where we can talk privately." As they moved through the gallery toward his office, Journey found herself noticing details that spoke to Bruce's character. He stopped to straighten a piece that had been knocked slightly askew, his touch gentle and reverent. He greeted each staff member by name, asking about their families and projects with genuine interest. When a young artist approached with questions about her upcoming exhibition, he gave her his full attention, offering encouragement and practical advice with equal measure. His office was as unpretentious as the man himself, a simple desk covered with sketches and photographs, walls lined with books about community development and social justice, a comfortable couch surrounded by plants that looked lovingly tended. This wasn't the sterile executive suite she had expected, but rather the workspace of someone who cared more about purpose than prestige. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Bruce said, settling into a chair across from them. "Now, tell me about your grandmother's situation." Journey began hesitantly, but as she described Mama Rose's 3 decades of service at the Riverside Community Center, Bruce's expression grew increasingly intense. He asked thoughtful questions about the center's programs, the population it served, the impact of its potential closure on the surrounding neighborhood. His knowledge of community development issues was impressive, but it was his emotional engagement that surprised her most. "The developer is within his legal rights," Journey concluded, "but morally, this feels like theft. My grandmother has given her life to helping people who have nowhere else to turn, and now they're all going to lose the one place that provided stability and hope." Bruce was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of his face as he processed what she had shared. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of personal understanding that made her heart skip. "I know what it's like to depend on places like your grandmother's center," he said quietly. "When I was 8 years old, I aged out of a foster placement and ended up at a community center in Detroit. The director there, Mrs. Washington, made sure I had dinner every night and help with homework. She's the reason I stayed in school, the reason I learned to believe I could build something meaningful with my life." The raw honesty in his confession moved Journey profoundly. She could see the boy he had been in his eyes, vulnerable, searching for belonging, finding it in the kindness of strangers who chose to care. "What if we organized a fundraising exhibition?" Bruce continued, his energy shifting into problem-solving mode. "We could showcase artwork created by community members, children, seniors, families who have been helped by the center. Tell their stories through art, make the developers and city officials see what they're really destroying." "Do you think it would work?" Journey asked, hope blooming in her chest despite her attempts to remain realistic. "I think," Bruce said, leaning forward with the intensity of someone who had spent years turning impossible dreams into reality, "that when people see the truth of what your grandmother has built, they won't be able to look away. Art has the power to change hearts, and changed hearts can move mountains." As they discussed logistics and timelines, Journey found herself studying Bruce's hands as he sketched rough ideas on a notepad. They were strong hands, marked by calluses that suggested real work rather than purely theoretical involvement. When he reached for a book to show her examples of similar projects, their fingers brushed accidentally, and she felt an electric current run through her entire body. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and recognition. Bruce's eyes met hers, and she saw her own surprise reflected back at her. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was a married woman seeking help for her grandmother, not a woman discovering that her heart could still skip at a stranger's touch. "I should get started on some preliminary outreach," Bruce said, his voice slightly hoarse as he pulled his hand back. "If you're willing to work with me on this, we could have something really special." "Yes," Journey said, the word carrying more weight than a simple agreement to collaborate. I'd like that very much. As they exchanged phone numbers and scheduled their next meeting, Journey felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at territory that was both terrifying and irresistibly appealing. She had come here seeking help for Mama Rose's community center, but she was leaving with something far more complicated, the beginning of a connection that threatened to upend every assumption she had made about her life and what she deserved from it. Walking back to her car with Aurora, who had remained diplomatically quiet during most of the meeting, Journey felt the weight of possibility pressing against her chest. "That," Aurora said with obvious satisfaction, "went better than I expected." "He seems very committed to helping," Journey replied carefully, though they both knew commitment was not the only thing that had sparked in that office. "Journey," Aurora said gently, stopping beside the car to look at her friend directly. "I've known Bruce for 3 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you today." "I'm married, Aurora," Journey said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "I know," Aurora replied. "I'm just saying that sometimes the universe puts people in our path when we need them most. What we do with that gift is up to us." As Journey drove home through the busy afternoon traffic, she found herself thinking not about the fundraising exhibition or the community center's future, but about the way Bruce had said her name as if it were something precious he wanted to protect. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen by another person, and the sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had no idea that this meeting would become the first crack in the carefully constructed walls around her heart, or that saving her grandmother's life's work would require her to examine every choice she had made about her own. Chapter 3. Coffee Confessions and Awakening Hearts. Some conversations change the trajectory of a life in the space of a single afternoon, and Journey Queen discovered this truth while watching Bruce Brando's hands wrap around a coffee cup as if he were protecting something infinitely precious. 2 days had passed since their meeting at the gallery, 2 days during which Journey had found herself thinking about Bruce's offer to help save the community center with an intensity that both surprised and concerned her. She'd told herself that her frequent thoughts about their collaboration were purely practical. After all, Mama Rose's crisis required immediate attention and creative solutions. But sitting across from him now, in the intimate confines of Cornerstone Cafe, she could no longer deny that her interest extended beyond professional cooperation. "God, I love this place." Bruce looked around the small cafe with genuine appreciation, taking in the mismatched vintage furniture and exposed brick walls lined with local artwork. No corporate sterility, no manufactured ambiance, just real people making real coffee. Journey had suggested the cafe, a family-owned spot where she often came to think when her house felt too oppressive. Something about Bruce's immediate comfort here, the way he'd nodded hello to the barista by name, told her he understood the difference between authentic and performative. "I spent most of yesterday sketching exhibition layouts," Bruce said, pulling a worn notebook from his jacket pocket. His fingers bore fresh traces of charcoal and paint, evidence of hands that created as well as planned. "I'm thinking we transform the entire gallery into a representation of the community center itself, different stations showing various programs, with artwork created by the people whose lives your grandmother has touched." Journey leaned forward to study his sketches, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with coffee, and something distinctly him, clean soap, maybe a hint of paint thinner. His ideas weren't just spatial arrangements, but emotional journeys, showing how visitors would move through the exhibition, experiencing stories in a sequence that built understanding and empathy. "This is brilliant," she said, tracing her finger along his drawings. The children's section flowing into senior programs, then job training areas, like walking through the center itself. "You've thought of everything. It's like—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Like you really get what Mama Rose has built there." "I do." Bruce's voice carried quiet conviction. These places, they're sacred, you know? Not in a religious way, but in a human way. Journey finished and saw something light up in his eyes. Exactly, in a human way. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Most people see community centers as places where poor kids hang out after school. They don't understand that we're looking at transformation in its most basic form. As he explained his vision in greater detail, Journey found herself studying not just his words, but the way he spoke them. No pretense, no calculated charm designed to impress. This was a man who genuinely cared about the work they were planning, who understood that saving the community center meant preserving something sacred. "Can I ask you something personal?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Sure." "Why does this matter so much to you? I mean, beyond just supporting community causes. This feels—" She gestured between them, then caught herself. "The way you talk about it feels personal." Bruce was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. When he looked up, she saw vulnerability in his expression that made her chest tight. "I told you I grew up in foster care." His voice was careful, measured. "What I didn't mention is that I aged out of the system when I was 18 with nowhere to go. No family, no safety net, no idea how to navigate the world alone." The confession hit Journey harder than she'd expected. Looking at Bruce now, successful, confident, clearly comfortable in his own skin, it was impossible to imagine him as a scared teenager with no place to call home. "Jesus, what did you do?" "Slept in shelters, community centers, ate meals wherever I could find them." His honesty was matter of fact, but she could hear the old pain underneath. "For 8 months, I was basically invisible, just another homeless kid nobody wanted to deal with." "How did you—" She gestured at him, at the successful man sitting across from her. A community center director named Harold Sanchez. Bruce's entire demeanor softened. "He let me sleep on a cot in his office in exchange for maintenance work. But more than that, he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Helped me apply for college grants. Drove me to job interviews, never once made me feel like I was charity." "He sounds incredible." He was. "Harold died 5 years ago, but not before seeing me graduate college and start my first business." Bruce smiled at the memory, but Journey could see grief that still lived behind his eyes. "He used to say that community centers weren't in the business of changing lives. They were in the business of giving people tools to change their own lives." The depth of his personal connection to their cause moved Journey profoundly. She'd expected to work with a wealthy philanthropist motivated by tax benefits and social recognition. Instead, she'd found a man whose commitment grew from authentic understanding of what it meant to need the kind of help Mama Rose provided. "I'm sorry you went through that." The words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd shared. "Don't be—" Bruce's response was immediate, firm. "Those experiences taught me that everyone deserves to be seen and valued, regardless of their circumstances. They're why I do this work now, why I can't walk away when places like your grandmother's center are threatened." Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of Journey's phone. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop. Elias. "Excuse me," she said to Bruce, then answered with forced politeness. "Hello? Where are you?" Her husband's voice carried that sharp edge she'd learned to recognize as barely controlled irritation. "I called your office. They said you took another sick day." Bruce politely looked away, focusing on his notebook while clearly trying to give her privacy for what was obviously a difficult conversation. "I'm handling the situation with my grandmother's community center." Journey kept her voice level despite the familiar anxiety building in her chest. "You're still playing around with that?" Elias's dismissive tone made her face flush with embarrassment, especially knowing Bruce could hear every word. "We have the Henderson dinner party tonight. I assume you haven't forgotten our actual obligations." The casual cruelty of his phrasing, playing around, and actual obligations hit her like ice water. Every meaningful moment of her work with Bruce, every genuine connection she'd felt to this cause, reduced to childish games that interfered with social climbing. "I'll be there," she said quietly, though the words felt like swallowing broken glass. "Good. Wear the blue dress, not one of your artistic experiments, and try to focus on being charming rather than whatever social justice crusade you're on this week." The line went dead, leaving Journey staring at her phone with a mixture of hurt and rage that she struggled to hide. Across the table, Bruce's expression had shifted from polite disinterest to something approaching concern. "I'm sorry about that," she said, attempting to return to their previous conversation as if nothing had happened. "You don't need to apologize." Bruce's voice was gentle but firm. "Are you okay?" The simple question, asked with genuine care rather than obligation, nearly undid her completely. When was the last time someone had asked about her well-being and actually waited for an honest answer? "I'm fine," she said automatically, then caught herself in the lie. "Actually, no. I'm not fine. My marriage is—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like betrayal. "It's complicated. Do you want to talk about it?" Did she? Journey had spent years maintaining the fiction that her marriage was simply going through a rough patch, that she and Elias were both successful professionals who had temporarily lost their way but would eventually find their way back to each other. She'd never admitted to anyone how completely disconnected she felt. "Elias and I have been growing apart for years," she heard herself say, surprised by her own honesty. "We got married when I was 28 and he was 30. Thought we wanted the same things, but somewhere along the way we became different people with different priorities." "What do you want?" Bruce asked softly, and something in his tone made the question feel like an invitation to be completely honest. "I want to matter." The words came from some deep place she hadn't known existed. "I want to do work that makes a difference, to be with someone who sees me as more than an accessory to their success. I want to feel alive instead of just going through the motions." The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and raw. Journey couldn't believe she'd shared such intimate thoughts with someone she'd known for only days, but something about Bruce's presence made honesty feel not just safe, but necessary. "You do matter," Bruce said, his voice carrying conviction that made her heart race. "What you're doing for your grandmother, for the community center, that matters enormously. And anyone who can't see that—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you." The intensity of his response, the way he looked at her as if she were someone worth fighting for, created a moment of connection so profound that Journey felt physically dizzy. This was dangerous territory, sitting in a coffee shop with a man who wasn't her husband, sharing feelings she'd never expressed to anyone, feeling more understood in 2 hours than she had in years of marriage. "I should go," she said suddenly, gathering her purse with hands that trembled slightly. "I need to get ready for tonight." "Of course." Bruce stood as she prepared to leave, his movements careful and respectful. "Should we schedule another meeting to continue planning the exhibition?" "Yes." The word came out too quickly, betraying her eagerness. "Tomorrow." "Same time?" "I'll be here," Bruce replied, and something in his smile made her think he understood exactly why she wanted to see him again. As she walked to her car, Journey felt as if she were moving through a dream where everything familiar had shifted slightly out of focus. The conversation with Bruce had awakened something in her that she'd thought permanently dormant, a sense of possibility, of being truly seen and valued for who she was rather than who others expected her to be. Driving home to prepare for another evening of performing the role of dutiful wife, she found herself thinking not about the dinner party ahead, but about tomorrow's meeting. For the first time in years, she had something to look forward to that belonged entirely to her. She didn't yet understand that this feeling of anticipation was the first crack in the carefully constructed walls around her heart, or that her growing connection to Bruce was illuminating just how much of herself she'd lost in her marriage to Elias. All she knew was that she felt more alive after 2 hours with Bruce than she had in months of her regular life. The transformation had begun, though she wouldn't recognize it fully until much later. For now, it was enough to carry the memory of being seen and valued by someone who understood that saving a community center meant preserving something sacred, and that she was worthy of that same kind of protection and care. Chapter 4. The Art of Falling Without Permission. Love, Journey discovered, was not the thunderbolt she had always imagined, but rather 1,000 small moments that accumulated like brushstrokes on a canvas, until suddenly, impossibly, a masterpiece emerged where none had existed before. The week following their coffee shop conversation had blurred into a series of shared purposes and stolen glances, each day bringing new reasons for Journey and Bruce to work closely together on the community center exhibition. What had begun as collaborative planning had evolved into something far more intimate, a partnership that extended beyond their stated mission into territory that neither had acknowledged, but both felt with growing intensity. On Monday, they had visited the Riverside Community Center together, walking through the building that would soon be demolished unless their fundraising efforts succeeded. Journey watched Bruce interact with the children in the after-school program, noting how he knelt to their eye level when they spoke, how he listened to their stories with the same attention he gave to wealthy donors, how his face lit up with genuine delight when a shy 7-year-old named Marcus showed him a crayon drawing of his family. "This is where the magic happens," Mama Rose had said, leading them through the various program rooms while children and elderly volunteers continued their daily activities around them. "These babies come here scared and hungry, and they leave knowing they matter to somebody." Bruce had been unusually quiet during the tour, but Journey caught him wiping his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Later, as they walked to their cars, he had confided that Marcus reminded him of himself at that age, uncertain and searching for belonging in a world that often felt hostile to vulnerable children. Tuesday brought them to the gallery for exhibition planning, where Bruce's assistant Paisley Chen had laid out potential layouts on the main floor. Journey found herself watching Bruce's hands as he moved pieces around the mock-up, noting how he approached each decision with careful consideration for both aesthetic impact and emotional flow. "What if we create a timeline here?" she had suggested, pointing to the gallery's central wall. Starting with photographs of the community center when it first opened, then moving through the decades to show how many lives have been touched. "That's brilliant," Bruce had replied, his excitement evident in the way his entire face animated when a good idea took hold. "We could intersperse personal stories throughout, handwritten letters from people whose lives were changed, maybe some audio recordings of testimonials." Working together felt natural in a way that surprised them both. Their ideas built upon each other seamlessly, creating something more powerful than either could have achieved alone. When Journey suggested incorporating children's artwork throughout the space, Bruce immediately envisioned ways to display the pieces that would highlight their emotional impact. When Bruce proposed including a recreation of the center's reading corner, Journey knew exactly how to arrange the lighting to create intimacy within the larger gallery space. Wednesday had been devoted to community outreach, visiting families who had been helped by the center over the years. Bruce drove, navigating the city's neighborhoods with the confidence of someone who had spent time in all corners of the community. They interviewed grandmother Elena Rodriguez, whose granddaughter had received tutoring that helped her become the first person in their family to attend college. They spoke with Robert Chen, a formerly homeless veteran who had found housing assistance and job training that allowed him to rebuild his life. Each story they collected added weight to their mission, But Journey found herself equally moved by Bruce's responses to these conversations. He listened with complete attention, asked thoughtful follow-up questions, and never once made anyone feel like their story was being collected for someone else's agenda. This was personal for him in ways that went beyond his own experience with homelessness. "You're extraordinary at this," Journey had said as they drove between interviews. "The way you connect with people, it's like you see straight into their hearts." "I learned a long time ago that everyone has a story worth hearing," Bruce had replied. "The difference between people like your grandmother and the developers trying to tear down the center is that she knows those stories matter." Thursday brought an unexpected challenge when several potential donors had expressed concerns about supporting what they perceived as a political cause. Bruce had spent hours on the phone, carefully explaining that preserving community services wasn't about politics, but about basic human compassion. Journey had watched him navigate these conversations with remarkable grace, never losing his temper despite obvious frustration with attitudes that treated poor families as abstractions rather than people. "How do you stay so patient?" she had asked during a break between difficult phone calls. "Because getting angry won't save the center," Bruce had said simply, "and those children need advocates who can work within the system, even when the system is flawed." By Friday evening, they had spent nearly every waking hour together, their collaboration deepening into something that felt essential to both their lives. Journey had told Elias she was working late on the charity project, a description that made her feel physically ill because it reduced their meaningful work to something trivial. Bruce had rearranged his entire schedule, turning down lucrative opportunities to focus completely on their exhibition planning. Now, as they worked together in the gallery after hours, hanging preliminary artwork and testing lighting arrangements, Journey felt the weight of everything unspoken between them. The space was quiet except for the soft jazz Bruce had chosen for background music, creating an atmosphere of intimate focus that made her hyper-aware of every moment when their hands accidentally touched while adjusting a display. "I think this piece should go higher," Journey said, standing on a stepladder to reposition a painting created by one of the center's senior participants. The artwork depicted hands of different ages working together in a garden, symbolizing the intergenerational connections that made the center special. "Let me help," Bruce said, moving to steady the ladder. His hands gripped the sides just below where she stood, bringing him close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence even through the space between them. "How's that?" she asked, adjusting the painting's position while trying to ignore the way her heart raced at their proximity. "Perfect," Bruce said, but when she looked down, she realized he wasn't looking at the artwork. His eyes were on her face, and the expression she saw there made breathing suddenly difficult. "Journey," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight of emotion that matched what she felt building in her own chest. She climbed down from the ladder carefully, acutely aware that each step brought her closer to him. When she reached the ground, they stood facing each other in the warm gallery lighting, surrounded by artwork that told stories of hope and transformation, and she realized that her own story was about to take a turn she hadn't planned or expected. "This week has been," she began, then trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence, without acknowledging feelings that felt too dangerous to name. "I know," Bruce said, reaching up to gently touch her cheek. "I feel it too." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Journey knew she should step away, should maintain the professional distance that her marriage required, should remember all the reasons why this moment was complicated and potentially destructive. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, closing her eyes as his thumb traced along her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Bruce," she whispered, not sure if she was asking him to stop or begging him to continue. "I never expected this," he said, his other hand coming up to frame her face completely. "I thought I was helping save a community center, not falling in love with the most remarkable woman I've ever met." The word love sent shockwaves through her entire body. She opened her eyes to find him looking at her with an intensity that made her feel seen and cherished in ways she had forgotten were possible. "I'm married," she said, though the words felt like they belonged to someone else's life. "I know," Bruce replied, "and I would never ask you to do anything that goes against your values or commitments, but I need you to know that what I feel for you is real, and I hope, that you feel something too." "I do," she admitted, the confession emerging from someplace deeper than conscious thought. "God help me, I do." They moved toward each other simultaneously, drawn by forces neither could fully understand or resist. Journey felt as if she were watching herself from outside her body as Bruce's lips neared hers, felt the warmth of his breath against her skin, felt every assumption about her life and what she deserved shifting like tectonic plates beneath her feet. The kiss that followed was soft and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded with an enthusiasm that surprised them both. Bruce's hands tangled in her hair while hers gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer as weeks of suppressed attraction finally found expression. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Journey felt as if the world had fundamentally changed around them. The gallery looked the same, the music continued playing, but she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. "Journey," Bruce said, his forehead resting against hers while they both struggled to process what had just happened. "I know," she said, though she wasn't sure what she knew anymore. "I know this is complicated. I know we can't just pretend this didn't happen, but I also don't know what it means or what we're supposed to do now." "It means," Bruce said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes, "that we have something worth protecting, and that whatever happens next, we owe it to ourselves and to each other to be completely honest about what we want." "What do you want?" she asked, though part of her was terrified of his answer. "I want you," he said simply. "Not just tonight, not just while we're working on this project. I want to wake up every morning knowing I get to see your face and hear your voice. I want to support your dreams and share mine with you. I want to build something beautiful together, the way we've been doing all week." The honesty of his response overwhelmed her completely. When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such openness about their feelings and desires? When was the last time someone had made her feel wanted, not just for what she could provide, but for who she was? "I want that too," she admitted, then immediately felt the weight of her wedding ring against her finger. "But I don't know how to want it without destroying everything else in my life." "We don't have to figure everything out tonight," Bruce said gently. "But we also can't pretend this didn't happen or that what we feel isn't real." As they finished their work in subdued silence, both lost in their own thoughts about what had changed between them, Journey felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a life she had never imagined, but suddenly couldn't stop wanting. Driving home to the house she shared with Elias, she carried the memory of Bruce's kiss like a secret flame against her heart. Tomorrow would bring complications and difficult decisions, but tonight she allowed herself to hold on to the feeling of being truly desired and cherished by someone who saw all of her and wanted more rather than less. The art of falling in love, she realized, was not about choosing to feel something. It was about recognizing that the feeling had chosen you and then deciding whether you had the courage to honor it. Chapter 5. The night everything breaks open. The moment Journey realized she was capable of choosing love over fear was the same moment her marriage finally died, though it took a room full of witnesses and her husband's public humiliation for her to recognize what had already become a corpse. The Riverside Community Center fundraising exhibition had exceeded every expectation Bruce and Journey had dared to nurture during their weeks of planning. The Brando Gallery pulsed with energy as over 200 attendees moved between displays of artwork created by community members, children's paintings depicting dreams, photographs documenting 3 decades of service, sculptures from donated materials. Journey moved through the space feeling as if she were floating, buoyed by their success and the knowledge that they had already raised enough money to purchase the community center. More than the financial triumph, she was moved by the connections being forged, conversations between donors and community members that transcended boundaries, children explaining their artwork to collectors who listened with genuine respect. "Baby girl, you did this," Mama Rose whispered to her granddaughter during a quiet moment near the gallery's back wall. At 89, Mama Rose had insisted on attending despite her fatigue, determined to witness the community coming together to save her life's work. She wore her best dress, navy blue with tiny pearl buttons, and her eyes sparkled with tears of joy and pride. "We did this, Grandmama," Journey corrected gently, though her heart swelled at the recognition. "You created something worth saving. Bruce and I just helped people see what you've been building all these years." "That young man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars," Mama Rose observed, nodding toward where Bruce stood near the exhibition's centerpiece. Even from across the room, Journey could see his passion as he spoke with potential donors, his hands moving expressively as he explained the center's impact. "Mama Rose," Journey began, but her grandmother's knowing smile silenced any protest. "Child, I've been watching people fall in love for 89 years. I know what it looks like." Mama Rose squeezed her granddaughter's hand with surprising strength. "The question isn't whether you'll care for each other. The question is what you're going to do about it." Before Journey could respond, Bruce appeared at her side, his face glowing with excitement and accomplishment. "Journey, we need to announce the fundraising total," he said, then turned to acknowledge Mama Rose with respectful attention. "Mrs. Queen, you should be the one to share the news. This is your victory." "Our victory," Mama Rose corrected firmly, "and I think the announcement should come from the 2 people who made tonight possible." 20 minutes later, Journey found herself standing beside Bruce in front of the assembled crowd, her heart racing not just from public speaking, but from their proximity. They had carefully maintained professional distance throughout the evening, but now, sharing this moment of triumph, she felt the connection between them like an electric current. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bruce began, his voice carrying clearly through the gallery's main space. "3 weeks ago, we learned that the Riverside Community Center, a beacon of hope serving our city's most vulnerable families for 30 years, was scheduled for demolition to make way for luxury condominiums." The crowd grew quiet, their attention focused completely on Bruce's words and the passion with which he delivered them. "Tonight, because of your extraordinary generosity and the tireless efforts of Mrs. Rose Queen and her granddaughter Journey, we have raised not only enough money to purchase the community center, but sufficient funds to renovate and expand its programs." The announcement triggered enthusiastic applause, but Bruce raised his hand to continue. "More importantly, you have demonstrated that when a community comes together around shared values of compassion and service, there is no challenge we cannot overcome." Journey stepped forward as Bruce concluded, her voice clear despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "My grandmother always taught me that a community is measured not by its wealth, but by how it treats its most vulnerable members. Tonight, you have shown that our community's heart is vast and generous. On behalf of everyone whose life has been touched by the Riverside Community Center, thank you." The applause that followed was thunderous, accompanied by cheers and wiping of eyes throughout the crowd. Journey felt Bruce's hand briefly touch hers as they stepped back, a gesture of shared accomplishment that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. The triumph was shattered 30 minutes later when Elias finally arrived, clearly having spent time at a bar before making his appearance. Journey had mentioned the fundraiser to him several times, but he dismissed it as unimportant, making it clear that he considered her involvement embarrassing rather than meaningful. Now, watching him navigate through the crowd with studied casualness that barely concealed his intoxication, Journey felt familiar embarrassment and disappointment. "Quite a little gathering you've put together," Elias said when he reached her side, his words slightly slurred and his tone carrying condescending sarcasm. "Very authentic." The word dripped with disdain, and several nearby guests turned to stare at the obvious tension between them. Journey forced a smile, hoping to minimize the scene she could feel building. "Elias, let me introduce you to some of the donors." "Oh, I'm sure they're all very impressed with themselves," Elias replied, loudly enough that surrounding conversations faltered. "Nothing like a good charity event to make rich people feel better about their privilege." The casual cruelty of his observation, dismissing the evening's genuine accomplishments and the donors' sincere generosity, made Journey's face burn with shame. These were people who had opened their hearts and wallets to support vulnerable families, and her husband was treating them like narcissistic dilettantes. Bruce appeared beside them with perfect timing. "You must be Elias," he said, extending his hand with gracious professionalism. "I'm Bruce Brando. Journey has been absolutely instrumental in organizing tonight's exhibition. You should be very proud of her dedication." Elias looked Bruce up and down with obvious assessment, taking in his paint-stained clothes and artistic sensibilities with barely concealed disdain. "Oh yes, Journey's little art project," Elias said, ignoring Bruce's extended hand. "I suppose everyone needs a hobby." The dismissiveness of his response, reducing weeks of passionate work to a little art project and a hobby, finally pushed Journey past her breaking point. For too long, she had allowed Elias to diminish her interests and accomplishments. "This isn't a hobby, Elias," she said, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone within hearing distance. "This is meaningful work that will impact hundreds of families for years to come. Tonight we saved a community center that provides essential services to people who desperately need them." "Don't be so dramatic," Elias replied, his voice rising with alcohol-fueled irritation. "It's an old building that was going to be torn down anyway. Progress doesn't stop for sentimental charity cases." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, donors and community members stared in shocked disbelief at his casual dismissal of everything they had worked to achieve. "I think you should leave," Journey said quietly, her voice steady despite the internal earthquake his words had triggered. "Excuse me?" Elias's surprise at her resistance was evident. "You heard me. This evening is important to me, to my grandmother, and to everyone here who cares about helping others. If you can't respect that, then you need to leave." "Don't tell me what to do, Journey. I'm your husband." The possessive edge in his voice, the assumption that their marriage gave him the right to dismiss her work and embarrass her publicly, crystallized everything that had been wrong between them for years. "Then act like it," she replied, her voice carrying across the gallery with crystal clarity. "Act like someone who supports my dreams instead of someone who resents them." Elias stared at her for a long moment, clearly recognizing that something fundamental had shifted. The submissive wife who had spent years accommodating his preferences had been replaced by someone willing to fight for what mattered to her. "We'll discuss this at home," he said finally, his attempt at authoritative control falling flat. "No," Journey replied. "We'll discuss this with lawyers." Without another word, Elias turned and stalked toward the gallery's exit, leaving behind shocked silence and sympathetic glances. Journey watched him go, feeling as if she were witnessing the end of a performance that had been running far too long. Bruce moved closer, not to comfort her, but simply to stand beside her in solidarity, his presence steady and supportive, without being presumptuous. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the crowd, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable tension, "let's continue celebrating the extraordinary work of the Riverside Community Center." Gradually, conversation resumed throughout the gallery. though Journey noticed several people approaching her with words of support and understanding. The confrontation with Elias, rather than undermining the evening's success, seemed to have deepened people's appreciation for her commitment. 2 hours later, as the last guests departed and gallery staff began cleaning up, Journey found herself sitting alone in Bruce's office, emotionally drained but strangely liberated. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was finally fading, leaving behind a mixture of exhaustion and clarity. Bruce knocked softly before entering, carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing an expression of gentle concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "I think," Journey said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them, "I just ended my marriage in front of 200 people. Are you okay with that?" She considered the question seriously, examining her feelings for regret or panic and finding neither. "Yes," she said with growing certainty. "I think I've been okay with it for a long time. I just needed something worth fighting for to help me see how much I'd been settling for." As they sat together in the peaceful aftermath of the evening's emotional storm, surrounded by artwork that celebrated resilience and transformation, Journey felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the exhilarating terror of choosing authenticity over security, of risking everything for the possibility of finding something real. The fundraiser had saved the community center, but more importantly, it had shown her that she was worth saving too. Chapter 6. The Courage to Choose Happiness. The morning after you realize your marriage is dead arrives with a clarity so sharp it feels like breathing pure oxygen after years of suffocating in stale air. And Journey Queen woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window with the profound relief of someone who had finally stopped pretending. She lay still for several minutes, listening to the quiet that filled the house like a presence unto itself. Elias had not come home the previous night. Whether from pride, anger, or simple indifference, she neither knew nor cared. For the first time in years, his absence felt like a gift rather than an abandonment, a space where she could exist without constantly managing his moods or minimizing herself to accommodate his preferences. Rolling over, she caught sight of her reflection in the antique mirror above their dresser, her dresser now, she supposed, and was surprised by what she saw. The woman looking back had the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd fought a battle, but also a brightness in her gaze that had been missing for longer than she cared to calculate. She looked like someone who had remembered how to fight for what mattered. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, displaying a text from Ailani. "Saw the news article about the fundraiser. You were incredible. Call me when you're ready to talk." The mention of a news article sent Journey searching online, where she found a glowing piece in the city's arts section about the community center exhibition. The journalist had captured not only the fundraising success, but also the emotional impact of the evening, describing it as a powerful demonstration of what becomes possible when artistic vision meets genuine social commitment. There was a photograph of her and Bruce addressing the crowd, their shared purpose evident in their expressions. Reading the article filled her with pride and satisfaction, emotions that had become foreign during her marriage. When was the last time she'd felt genuinely accomplished? When had she last seen her work described in terms of vision and commitment rather than dismissed as hobby or indulgence? She called Ailani while making coffee in the kitchen that had never felt like hers, despite 7 years of residence. Her younger sister answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the warmth and concern that had always made her Journey's closest confidant. "Jesus, girl, how are you feeling?" Ailani asked without preamble, her nurse's instincts attuned to emotional as well as physical wellness. "Free," Journey said, surprising herself with the honesty. "Scared and confused and uncertain about everything, but free." "Good." Ailani's response was characteristically direct. "I've been waiting years for you to realize that being married to Elias was like being slowly poisoned by someone who convinced you the poison was medicine." The analogy was harsh but accurate. Journey thought about the gradual erosion of her confidence, the way she'd learned to question her own judgment and defer to Elias's opinions about everything from career choices to friendships. She'd become a stranger to herself, someone who prioritized peace over authenticity. "I think I need to call Ronin," she said, referring to the family attorney who'd handled her parents' estate and remained a trusted advisor over the years. "I think you're right. And Journey," Ailani's voice softened, "I'm proud of you. Last night you chose yourself for the first time in years, and that takes enormous courage." After their conversation ended, Journey spent the morning researching divorce proceedings and gathering financial documents, approaching the task with the same methodical determination she'd brought to organizing the community center exhibition. By noon, she'd scheduled an appointment with Ronin Blackwood for the following day and begun the process of untangling her life from Elias's with surgical precision. The hardest part wasn't the practical logistics, but the emotional reckoning with how completely she'd lost herself in their marriage. Looking through their shared belongings, wedding photos that showed a younger version of herself who still believed in their future together, gifts from Elias that she'd once treasured but now recognized as attempts to shape her into his preferred version of a wife, she felt grief not for what she was losing, but for how much time she'd spent trying to become someone else's idea of acceptable. Bruce called that afternoon while she was boxing items for donation, his voice carefully neutral as he checked on her well-being without overstepping boundaries that had become complicated since their moment in the gallery. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he said. "Last night was intense, and I know you're dealing with a lot right now." "I'm okay," she replied, and meant it more than she'd expected. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm awake for the first time in years." "I'm glad to hear that." She could hear the smile in his voice. "I also wanted you to know that I'm here if you need anything, as a friend, as someone who cares about your well-being. No pressure, no expectations, just support." The careful way he framed his offer touched her deeply. He was giving her space to navigate her divorce without the additional complexity of their growing feelings for each other, demonstrating a respect for her autonomy that stood in stark contrast to Elias's controlling behavior. "Thank you," she said. "That means more than you know. Take care of yourself, Journey. You've been incredibly brave, and you deserve time to figure out what comes next without anyone else's agenda complicating things." Elias returned home that evening with the sullen demeanor of someone who'd spent the day nursing both his hangover and wounded pride. He found Journey in their home office, organizing financial documents with clinical efficiency. "I see you're serious about this dramatic gesture," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk with studied casualness. "It's not a gesture, Elias. It's a decision." She looked up from the bank statement spread before her, noting how different he seemed now that she'd stopped trying to manage his moods or protect his ego. "I've scheduled a meeting with Ronin tomorrow to discuss separation terms. Don't you think you're overreacting?" Elias's tone carried the reasonable patience of someone addressing a child's tantrum. "So, I had a few drinks and said some things I shouldn't have. That doesn't mean we need to blow up our entire marriage." The casual dismissal of his behavior, reducing his public humiliation of her work and his general pattern of disrespect to having a few drinks, crystallized everything that had been wrong between them. "This isn't about last night, Elias. Last night was just the moment I stopped pretending that what we have is a marriage instead of a business arrangement that's outlived its usefulness." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means we've been strangers living in the same house for years. We don't support each other's dreams, we don't enjoy each other's company, and we certainly don't love each other the way married people should." Journey's voice remained steady despite the enormity of what she was saying. "We've been performing the roles of husband and wife without any of the substance that makes those roles meaningful." Elias was quiet for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a recognition that her assessment was accurate, even if he wasn't prepared to admit it openly. So what? You're going to throw away 7 years of marriage for some fantasy about that artist? His attempt at wounded dignity fell flat, revealing the calculation underneath. I'm ending our marriage because it's already over, Journey replied. It's been over for years. We just kept going through the motions because it was easier than admitting we'd grown into incompatible people. And Bruce Brando has nothing to do with your sudden clarity. Bruce helped me remember who I used to be before I convinced myself that being quiet and accommodating was the same thing as being loved. But he didn't create the problems in our marriage, Elias. Those existed long before I met him. The conversation continued for another hour, cycling through recriminations and attempts at reconciliation that felt hollow to both participants. By the end, they'd established the basic framework for a civil separation. Elias would keep the house, Journey would take her personal belongings and half their shared assets, and they'd divide their social circles with minimal drama. I suppose I should have seen this coming, Elias said as they concluded their negotiations with business-like efficiency. You've been different lately, more independent. I've been myself lately, Journey corrected, for the first time in years. 3 days later, she signed a lease on a small apartment in the Arts District, 15 minutes from both the community centre and Bruce's gallery. The space was a converted loft with exposed brick walls, tall windows, and enough room for her to create a home office where she could pursue the interior design practice she'd dreamed of starting for years. Moving day arrived with unseasonable warmth and bright sunshine that felt like benediction. Ailani and Aurora helped her transfer boxes from the house that had never felt like home to the apartment that immediately welcomed her presence. As they arranged furniture and unpacked belongings that looked completely different in their new context, Journey felt as if she were reclaiming pieces of herself that had been stored away for safekeeping. This feels like you, Aurora observed, standing in the living room that Journey had arranged around comfort and creativity rather than entertaining and status. Warm and authentic and completely your own. It does, Journey agreed, looking around at the space that reflected her actual preferences rather than compromises designed to please someone else. I'd forgotten what that felt like. That evening, after her helpers had departed and she found herself alone in her new home for the first time, Journey sat by the tall windows watching the sunset over the city skyline. She thought about the community center families who would continue receiving support because she'd found the courage to fight for something meaningful. She thought about Mama Rose, whose life's work would continue touching lives for generations to come. She thought about Bruce, whose respect for her autonomy had allowed her to make this transition without pressure or complications. Most of all, she thought about the woman she'd been before her marriage. Someone who believed in fighting for justice, who found joy in creative work, who expected to be valued for her mind and passions rather than her willingness to accommodate others' preferences. That woman had been buried but not destroyed, and now she was emerging with the hard-won wisdom that came from surviving disappointment and choosing hope anyway. Her phone buzzed with a text from Bruce. "Thinking of you on your first night in your new place. I hope it feels like home." She smiled as she typed her response. "It feels like me. Thank you for helping me remember who that is." Outside her windows, the city sparkled with possibility, and for the first time in years, Journey felt capable of reaching for anything her heart desired. The courage to choose happiness, she realized, was not a single dramatic gesture, but a series of small decisions to honor her own worth. Tonight marked the beginning of a life built on authenticity rather than compromise, and the possibilities felt infinite. Chapter 7. Learning to breathe again. Freedom, Journey discovered, tasted like morning coffee brewed exactly to her preference in a kitchen where no one questioned her choices, and it sounded like quiet that invited contemplation rather than demanded performance. 2 months had passed since she moved into her loft apartment, and the rhythm of single life had become as natural as breathing. She woke each morning without the knot of anxiety that had characterized her marriage, without needing to gauge someone else's mood before determining her own emotional trajectory for the day. The simple pleasure of choosing her own schedule, decorating according to her personal taste, and pursuing interests without justification had created a sense of peace she hadn't realized was possible. Her interior design practice was flourishing beyond her most optimistic projections. Word had spread through the non-profit community about her work on the gallery exhibition, leading to contracts with 3 community organizations seeking to create more welcoming and functional spaces. She'd transformed a women's shelter's common area into a place of dignity and comfort, redesigned a food bank's distribution center to improve both efficiency and client experience, and was currently planning a complete renovation of the children's wing at Riverside Community Center. "You found your calling," Aurora observed one evening as they shared dinner in Journey's apartment, surrounded by fabric samples and architectural sketches spread across every available surface. "I haven't seen you this energized about work since college." "It doesn't feel like work," Journey replied, holding up 2 paint swatches in the lamplight to compare their subtle differences. "When you're designing spaces for people who genuinely need them, when every decision can impact someone's daily life in meaningful ways, it feels like purpose." The transformation extended beyond her professional life into every aspect of her existence. She'd rediscovered her love of weekend farmers markets, spending Saturday mornings selecting fresh produce and flowers without rushing home to accommodate someone else's plans. She'd reconnected with college friends who had gradually disappeared from her life during her marriage, rebuilding relationships that Elias had found tedious or threatening. Most significantly, she'd begun volunteering at the community center 3 afternoons a week, working directly with the children and seniors whose lives had been saved by their successful fundraising campaign. It was during these volunteer hours that she felt most connected to the person she'd been before marriage taught her to doubt her own instincts. Reading to elementary school children who hung on every word, helping teenagers with college applications, organizing activities for seniors who found community and purpose in the center's programs. These interactions reminded her that her natural inclination toward service and care could be channeled into meaningful action rather than self-diminishment. The community center also provided regular opportunities to see Bruce, though they both maintained careful boundaries around their interactions. He visited frequently to document the center's expanded programs for potential donors, and their professional collaboration continued to demonstrate the natural partnership that had made their fundraising exhibition so successful. But they avoided being alone together, communicating primarily through group settings where their obvious connection could be attributed to shared commitment rather than personal attraction. Despite these precautions, Journey was acutely aware of Bruce's presence whenever he appeared at the center. She noticed the way children gravitated toward him during his visits, how he remembered details about their lives and dreams from previous conversations. She observed his interactions with the elderly volunteers, the respectful attention he paid to their stories, and the genuine interest he showed in their perspectives. Most of all, she noticed how he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Glances filled with warmth and longing that matched what she felt but couldn't act upon while her divorce proceedings remained pending. "You two are being ridiculous," Aurora said one afternoon after witnessing Bruce and Journey's elaborate dance around each other during a planning meeting for the center's upcoming expansion. "The chemistry between you could power the entire building, but you're both so busy being respectful of each other's boundaries that you're missing the fact that you're both ready to move forward." "My divorce isn't final yet," Journey replied, though she knew Aurora was right about the mutual attraction that had only intensified during their months of careful friendship. "Your marriage ended the night of the fundraiser," Aurora countered. "Everything since then has been paperwork. At some point, you have to trust that it's okay to want something good for yourself. The conversation stayed with Journey throughout the following week, particularly during the long evenings when she worked on design projects in her apartment and found herself thinking about Bruce's hands as he sketched exhibition layouts, about the way his voice grew soft when he spoke about his childhood experiences in foster care, about the moment after their almost kiss when he'd promised to support her choices without pressure or expectations. The tension reached a breaking point on a Thursday evening when they found themselves working together after hours at the community center, organizing donated books for the newly expanded library. The building was quiet except for the soft jazz playing from Bruce's phone and the occasional sound of traffic from the street outside. They worked in comfortable synchronization, sorting volumes by age group and subject matter, while discussing plans for the upcoming literacy program launch. "I think the picture books should go on the lower shelves where the youngest children can reach them," Journey suggested, kneeling to arrange a collection of brightly illustrated stories that had been donated by a local bookstore. "Agreed," Bruce said, moving to help her organize the display. "And we should create a comfortable reading corner with cushions and soft lighting where parents can share books with their children." As they worked together to arrange the space, their conversation flowed naturally from practical logistics to broader questions about education, community building, and the role of storytelling in child development. Journey found herself remembering why she'd been drawn to Bruce initially, not just his physical appeal, though that remained powerful, but his intellectual curiosity and emotional intelligence, his ability to see connections between seemingly disparate ideas, and his commitment to translating those insights into meaningful action. "Hand me that poetry collection," she said, pointing to a volume of Maya Angelou's work that sat just beyond her reach on the table behind Bruce. Instead of simply passing her the book, Bruce opened it to a random page and began reading aloud in the warm, intimate tone she remembered from their early conversations at the cafe. "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you," he read, his voice carrying the weight of personal understanding that made the words resonate beyond their literary context. The passage hung in the air between them, charged with meaning that extended far beyond Maya Angelou's intended message. Journey looked up from her organizing to find Bruce watching her with an expression that made breathing suddenly difficult. "Bruce," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if she was asking him to continue or to stop. "I think about you every day," he said, setting the book aside and moving closer to where she knelt among the scattered volumes. "I think about what you said at the gallery that night, about wanting to matter, about wanting to feel alive instead of just existing. I think about how much I want to be the person who helps you feel that way." "You already do," she admitted, abandoning any pretense of professional distance. "You have since the first day we met. Being around you reminds me of who I used to be before I forgot that my dreams were worth pursuing." They moved toward each other simultaneously, drawn by the same force that had brought them together during the fundraising planning. But this time, instead of the desperate urgency that had characterized their first kiss, their coming together felt inevitable and right. Not a betrayal of existing commitments, but a recognition of something that had been building toward this moment for months. "Journey," Bruce said, his hands framing her face with the same gentle reverence she remembered from their previous encounter. "I love you. Not just the way you make me feel, but who you are, your passion for justice, your loyalty to your family, your courage in standing up for what matters. I love your laugh and your fierce intelligence and the way you see beauty in places other people overlook." The declaration was everything she'd dreamed of hearing and everything she'd been afraid to want. For months, she'd told herself that her feelings for Bruce were complicated by the timing, that she needed to establish her independence before considering a new relationship. But listening to his words, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she realized that love didn't wait for perfect timing. It arrived when hearts were ready to recognize it. "I love you too," she said, the words emerging from some deep place of truth she'd protected during all the months of careful friendship. "I love your kindness and your vision, and the way you make me feel capable of anything. I love how you see people, really see them, and how you use your privilege to lift others up instead of setting yourself apart." The kiss that followed was tender and profound, carrying the weight of everything they'd been holding back and the promise of everything they wanted to build together. When they finally broke apart, both were crying tears of relief and joy and recognition. "What happens now?" Journey asked, though she felt more certain about the future than she had about anything in years. "Now we figure out how to build something beautiful together," Bruce replied, "starting with being honest about what we want and brave enough to reach for it." As they finished organizing the library in companionable silence, Journey felt as if she were experiencing her life from inside a perfect moment she wanted to preserve forever. The work felt meaningful, the company felt essential, and the future felt full of possibilities that honored both her independence and her desire for partnership. Later that evening, after Bruce had walked her to her car and they'd shared another kiss under the streetlights outside the community center, Journey drove home with her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about Mama Rose's wisdom, about recognizing true love when it arrived, about Aurora's encouragement to trust her own desires, about the community of people who'd supported her through the difficult transition from her marriage to her new life. Most of all, she thought about Bruce's words about untold stories and the agony of keeping truth hidden. For too long, she'd been living a story that belonged to someone else's vision of who she should be. Now, finally, she was ready to write her own chapters with someone who saw her clearly and loved her completely, not despite her strength and independence, but because of them. The road ahead would require continued navigation of her divorce proceedings and the eventual public acknowledgement of her relationship with Bruce. But tonight, driving through the city streets toward her apartment that felt like home, Journey was certain that some stories were worth the complications they created. Love, real love, was worth fighting for, worth risking judgment for, worth building an entire life around. She was finally ready to stop learning how to breathe again and start learning how to soar. Chapter 8. When the past threatens the future. Sometimes the price of choosing authentic love is having your truth twisted into a weapon by those who mistake cruelty for power. And Journey Queen learned this lesson while reading her name in a newspaper article that transformed her love story into a scandal designed to destroy everything she and Bruce had built together. The article appeared on a Tuesday morning in the society section of the city's largest newspaper, written by gossip columnist Victoria Sterling, with the kind of venomous precision that suggested careful coaching from someone with intimate knowledge of the subjects involved. The headline read, "Gallery Owner's Community Crusade Masks Affair with Married Volunteer," and the accompanying photograph showed Journey and Bruce at the community center fundraiser, cropped and captioned to suggest illicit intimacy rather than collaborative success. Journey discovered the piece while reviewing morning news at her kitchen table, nearly choking on her coffee as she read the opening paragraph. Local philanthropist Bruce Brando, heir to a tech fortune and owner of the trendy Brando Gallery, has been conducting a months-long affair with married interior designer Journey Queen under the guise of saving a community center from development. Sources close to the situation describe Queen as an opportunistic gold digger who abandoned her successful attorney husband for the promise of greater wealth and social status. The article continued for several more paragraphs, weaving half-truths and outright fabrications into a narrative designed to destroy both their reputations. It suggested that Bruce had manipulated the community center crisis to gain access to a vulnerable married woman, that Journey had deliberately orchestrated the public confrontation with Elias to justify her infidelity, and that their charity work was merely a cover for an affair that had been ongoing since their first meeting, What made the piece particularly devastating was its strategic use of anonymous sources who provided quotes that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of Journey's marriage. Journey has always been ambitious, one source claimed. She married Elias for his connections, and when she met someone wealthier, she found an excuse to trade up. Another added, Bruce Brando has a pattern of targeting vulnerable women through his charity work. This community center situation was the perfect setup. By the time Journey finished reading, her hands were shaking with a combination of rage and devastation. Every meaningful moment of her relationship with Bruce had been distorted into evidence of calculation and deception. The genuine connection they shared, the authentic care they both felt for the community center, the courage it had taken her to leave an unhappy marriage, all of it had been reduced to a sordid tale of adultery and opportunism. Her phone began ringing immediately. Aurora calling to warn her about the article, Ailani expressing outrage at the blatant character assassination, several clients asking for clarification about the allegations. By noon, she'd received 3 separate calls from non-profit organizations questioning whether they should continue working with someone whose professional reputation had been so publicly compromised. Bruce called in the early afternoon, his voice tight with controlled fury and concern for her well-being. "Journey, I am so fucking sorry," he said without preamble, his usual composure cracked by genuine rage. "I've already spoken with my attorney about pursuing legal action for defamation. This is completely unacceptable." "It's not your fault," she replied, though she felt numb with shock at how quickly their private joy had been transformed into public scandal. "We both knew this was a risk when we decided to be together. We knew some people might disapprove of the timing," Bruce said. "We didn't anticipate someone would launch a coordinated attack designed to destroy our reputations and undermine the community center's success." The mention of potential damage to the community center intensified Journey's anguish. The article had specifically suggested that donations might be redirected to more legitimate charitable causes, given questions about the organizers' motivations. After everything they'd worked to achieve, after the families who were finally receiving stable support, the thought that their personal relationship might jeopardize those vital services was unbearable. "Bruce," she said carefully, "maybe we should consider whether being together is worth the potential damage to everything else we care about." The silence that followed her suggestion stretched long enough that she wondered if the call had been disconnected. "Are you saying you want to end our relationship because someone wrote lies about us in a newspaper?" he asked finally, his voice carrying hurt and disbelief in equal measure. "I'm saying maybe we need to think about whether our happiness is worth the cost to other people who depend on us." "The people who depend on us," Bruce said with growing intensity, "are the families served by the community center and the donors who believe in our mission. Those relationships are built on demonstrated results, not gossip column speculation. If we let bullies and liars dictate our choices, we're abandoning everyone who trusted us to fight for what matters." Despite his logical arguments, Journey felt overwhelmed by the public nature of their situation and the vicious personal attacks that showed no sign of subsiding. By evening, the story had been picked up by 2 additional publications, each adding new anonymous sources and increasingly outrageous claims about both their motivations and their conduct. The real blow came when Maverick Sterling, Bruce's business partner and closest friend, requested an emergency meeting at the gallery to discuss the situation's impact on our business relationships. Journey arrived to find Maverick pacing the gallery's main floor with obvious agitation, while Bruce sat at his desk, looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. 3 major donors called today to express concerns about continued association with the gallery, Maverick announced without preamble. The Morrison Foundation is reconsidering their commitment to next month's exhibition, and the Hartwell Trust wants to discuss a reputation management before finalizing their grant renewal. Journey felt sick to her stomach as she listened to the litany of professional consequences that her relationship with Bruce was creating for him. "I'm sorry," she said to Maverick. "I never intended for my personal situation to create problems for the gallery." "It's not your fault," Maverick replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But we need to consider whether continued public association between Bruce and you is sustainable given the current media attention." "What are you suggesting?" Bruce asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm suggesting that maybe you two should maintain some distance until this blows over," Maverick said. "Let the divorce finalize, give the gossip columns time to move on to other targets, then reassess the situation when cooler heads can prevail." The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the space where Journey and Bruce had shared so many meaningful moments. She could see the conflict in Bruce's expression, his love for her warring with his responsibility to the gallery, the artists they supported, and the causes they championed together. "No," Bruce said finally, standing to face his business partner with resolve that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "I will not let fear and gossip dictate my choices about whom I love or how I live my life." "Bruce, be reasonable," Maverick pressed. "This scandal could destroy everything we've built here." "This scandal," Bruce replied with growing intensity, "is built on lies told by bitter people who can't stand to see others find happiness. If our donors and partners are so easily swayed by malicious gossip that they can't see the truth of our work and our character, then they were never true allies to begin with." Maverick stared at his partner in obvious disbelief. "You're willing to risk everything for a relationship that's been public for less than a week?" "I'm willing to risk everything for love," Bruce said, turning to look directly at Journey with an expression that made her heart skip. "Real love, authentic connection, the kind of partnership that makes both people stronger and more capable of meaningful work in the world. That's not something you compromise on or hide from because small-minded people choose to believe lies over truth." The conviction in his voice, the way he spoke about their relationship as something worth defending rather than something to be managed or minimized, moved Journey profoundly. She thought about all the times during her marriage when Elias had asked her to make herself smaller to accommodate his preferences. All the moments when she'd been told that her authentic self was too much, too difficult, too inconvenient for others to accept. "Bruce is right," she said, surprising both men with the strength in her voice. "We haven't done anything wrong. We fell in love while working together on something meaningful, and we've been honest about our feelings and our intentions. I won't apologize for choosing happiness over a marriage that was already dead. And I won't ask Bruce to hide our relationship because other people prefer lies to truth." Maverick looked between them with obvious frustration before shaking his head in defeat. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said to Bruce, "because if this goes badly, it won't just affect your personal lives. It could destroy everything we've worked to build here." After Maverick left, Bruce and Journey stood together in the gallery's main space, surrounded by artwork that celebrated resilience and transformation, and Journey felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of what it meant to fight for love. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Bruce. "Maverick isn't wrong about the potential consequences." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Bruce replied, taking her hands in his with gentle firmness. "I've spent years using my resources and platform to support people who need advocates and allies. How can I do that work authentically if I'm not willing to defend what matters most in my own life?" "What if we lose everything?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been building since she first read the morning's article. "Then we'll build something new together," Bruce said with the kind of certainty that comes from finally understanding what truly matters. "But we won't lose each other, and we won't lose our integrity, and we won't teach the world that love can be destroyed by people who choose cruelty over compassion." Standing in the gallery where they'd first recognized their connection, surrounded by art that testified to the power of authentic expression, Journey felt her fear transform into fierce determination. They would face whatever consequences came from choosing each other, but they would face them together, with honesty and courage, and the unshakable conviction that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The battle for their reputation and their future was just beginning, but they would enter it united, stronger together than either could be alone. Chapter 9. Fighting for Love. Justice, Journey discovered, was not a noble concept that existed in marble courtrooms and legal precedent, but a messy human struggle that required ordinary people to stand up and speak truth in the face of those who preferred convenient lies. The divorce proceedings had transformed into a battlefield when Elias's attorney introduced newspaper clippings as evidence of Journey's adultery and moral turpitude. What should have been straightforward asset division had become a public trial of her character, with Elias seeking vindication and financial punishment for her choosing happiness over duty. "Your Honor," Elias's attorney, Catherine Hartwell, addressed the judge with theatrical solemnity, "My client has been the victim of calculated deception. While he worked to support their household, Mrs. Thornton conducted an affair with a wealthy gallery owner under the pretense of charity work." Journey sat beside attorney Ronan Blackwood, feeling the weight of every gaze in the packed courtroom. Word had spread through the community, drawing supporters from the Riverside Community Center, donors from the fundraising exhibition, and curiosity seekers attracted by the newspaper scandal. "The evidence clearly shows," Ms. Hartwell continued, holding up enlarged photographs that had been taken from various newspaper articles, "that Mrs. Thornton and Mr. Brando were engaged in an inappropriate relationship while she was still married to my client. This adultery justifies both the dissolution of the marriage and compensation for the emotional and financial damages my client has suffered." Ronan stood to respond, his 70-year-old frame carrying the dignity of 4 decades practicing family law. "Your Honor, the evidence shows nothing more than 2 dedicated individuals working together to save a vital community resource. The timeline clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Queen's marriage to Mr. Thornton was already irretrievably broken before she ever met Mr. Brando, and that any romantic relationship between them developed only after she had made the decision to end her marriage." Elias took the stand first, presenting himself as a wronged husband, betrayed by a wife he had loved and supported. His performance was polished, painting a picture of a woman who abandoned her commitments for a wealthier option. "I gave Journey everything," Elias said, dabbing his eyes with precision. "A beautiful home, financial security, social status. I thought we were building a life together. Then she met this gallery owner, and suddenly our marriage wasn't good enough anymore." When cross-examination began, Ronan's questions revealed cracks in Elias's facade. "When was the last time you attended an event important to her? Did you attend the community center fundraising exhibition? How would you characterize your behavior that evening?" Elias's jaw tightened as he was forced to acknowledge his public dismissal of Journey's work and his intoxicated disruption of the event. But it was Mama Rose's testimony that transformed the courtroom atmosphere completely. At 89, Mama Rose commanded attention simply by walking to the witness stand with quiet dignity. She wore her best Sunday dress and carried herself with authority that came from a lifetime of seeing truth clearly. "My granddaughter," Mama Rose said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, "is the finest person I know. She was 12 when her parents died, and I raised her to believe that your word is your bond and that you fight for what's right, even when it costs you something." She looked directly at the judge with eyes that had seen decades of struggle and triumph. "For 7 years, I watched that child try to make herself smaller and quieter, trying to please a man who saw her strength as a threat instead of a gift. When she came to me about the community center, I saw my real granddaughter for the first time in years, someone who remembered she was put on this earth to help people. And her relationship with Mr. Brando, Ronan asked. That young man loves my granddaughter the way she deserves to be loved, Mama Rose said without hesitation. He sees her heart and her mind and her soul, and he wants to help her be more of who she is, not less. That's what real love looks like. The surprise of the day came when Bruce asked to testify voluntarily on Journey's behalf. Neither attorney had called him as a witness, but he requested permission to address the court about his relationship with Journey and his observations of her character. Mr. Brando, the judge said, you understand that anything you say here today can be used against you in other proceedings. I understand, Your Honor. But there are things that need to be said, and I'm the only person who can say them. Bruce took the stand with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything meaningful in his life. He looked directly at the judge as he spoke, his voice clear and unwavering. Your Honor, I want to address the allegations that have been made about my relationship with Journey Queen. I met her when she was seeking help to save her grandmother's community center from demolition. Over the weeks that followed, I witnessed someone with extraordinary compassion, intelligence, and integrity working tirelessly to preserve something vital for vulnerable families. He paused, his gaze moving briefly to where Journey sat, before returning to the judge. I did fall in love with her during that time, but not because I was pursuing a married woman or because she was seeking financial advancement. I fell in love because I met someone who shared my values, who made me a better person, and who demonstrated every day that she cared more about serving others than serving herself. Bruce's voice grew stronger as he continued. The Journey Queen I know would never have left her marriage for money or status. She left because she finally remembered that she deserved to be with someone who saw her worth and supported her dreams. If loving someone that remarkable makes me guilty of something, then I accept that guilt gladly. The courtroom was completely silent as Bruce concluded his testimony, and Journey felt her heart breaking and mending simultaneously. No one had ever defended her with such eloquence and conviction, had ever spoken about her with such obvious pride and admiration. When the judge retired to consider her decision, the courtroom erupted in quiet conversations. Community center families who had attended to support Journey surrounded her with words of encouragement and gratitude. Several donors from the fundraising exhibition approached to express their continued support for both her work and her relationship with Bruce. Whatever happens, Aurora whispered to her friend, you've already won the only thing that matters. You've got people who see your truth and choose to stand with you. 2 hours later, Judge Patricia Morningstar returned with her decision. After reviewing all testimony and evidence presented, she announced, this court finds no credible evidence of adultery or misconduct on the part of Mrs. Thornton. The dissolution of this marriage appears to result from fundamental incompatibility rather than moral failing on either party's part. The divorce is granted, with assets to be divided equally as originally proposed. The relief that flooded through Journey was so intense, she felt momentarily dizzy. Around her, supporters erupted in quiet celebration while Elias's face darkened with obvious disappointment that his public humiliation campaign had failed to achieve its intended result. Outside the courthouse, as friends and supporters gradually dispersed, Journey found herself standing with Bruce in the late afternoon sunshine, both overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of the day. It's over, she said, hardly believing the words as she spoke them. The divorce is over, Bruce corrected gently. Everything else is just beginning. They moved toward each other, ready to finally acknowledge their love without legal complications or social constraints, but were immediately surrounded by reporters who had been waiting for this moment. Camera flashes and shouted questions about their relationship plans made private conversation impossible. "We should go," Bruce said, taking her hand publicly for the first time as they navigated through the media crowd toward his car. As they drove away from the courthouse together, Journey felt as if she were crossing a threshold into a completely new life. The legal battle was finished. Her marriage was officially ended, and the man she loved had just demonstrated his commitment to their relationship in the most public way possible. "Bruce," she began, ready to finally say everything she had been holding back. "I know," he said, squeezing her hand as they stopped at a red light. "I feel it too, but let's wait until we can be somewhere private, somewhere that belongs just to us. After everything we've been through to get here, our love deserves better than a conversation interrupted by reporters and cameras." She nodded, understanding that some moments were too important to rush or share with the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they navigated their relationship as free people. But tonight, she was content to sit beside the man who had fought for her in court and in life, driving toward a future that finally belonged entirely to them. Chapter 10. Coming Home to Love. Love, Journey realized as she stood before the mirror in her apartment 1 year later, was not the destination she had always imagined, but rather the beginning of every journey worth taking. The anniversary celebration of saving the Riverside Community Center was scheduled to begin in 2 hours, and she found herself taking extra care with her appearance, not from vanity, but from profound joy in preparing for an evening that would honor everything she and Bruce had built together. The past 12 months had transformed not only their relationship, but their entire lives, weaving their individual dreams into a shared vision that exceeded anything either had imagined possible. The community center had flourished beyond their most optimistic projections. The building renovation had been completed 6 months earlier, adding new classroom space, a commercial kitchen for feeding programs, and a technology center where teenagers learned computer skills and elderly residents stayed connected with distant family. The reading corner Bruce had envisioned had become the heart of the children's program, where volunteer readers gathered every afternoon. Journey's interior design practice had evolved into a consulting firm specializing in creating dignified, functional spaces for non-profit organizations throughout the region. Her work had expanded to include homeless shelters, food banks, domestic violence centers, and community health clinics, each project deepening her understanding of how physical environments could support human dignity and hope. The financial success exceeded her expectations, but more importantly, the work provided daily confirmation that her professional life could align completely with her values. Bruce's gallery had not only weathered the scandal that threatened to destroy his reputation, but emerged stronger and more respected. The donors who had wavered during the media storm had returned with renewed commitment once they witnessed the sustained excellence of his community-focused exhibitions. Their relationship had deepened through shared purpose and mutual respect, each partner encouraging the other to pursue ambitious goals while maintaining the individual identity that had attracted them initially. They had moved in together 8 months earlier, choosing a restored Victorian house within walking distance of both the community centre and the gallery. As she applied lipstick in the bathroom mirror, Journey caught sight of the engagement ring that had appeared on her finger 3 weeks earlier, during a quiet dinner at the same cafe where they had shared their first vulnerable conversation about dreams and disappointments. Bruce had proposed not with grand gestures or public displays, but with the intimate sincerity that characterized everything meaningful between them. "Journey," he had said, reaching across the small table to take her hands in his. "I want to spend the rest of my life building beautiful things with you. Will you marry me?" The simplicity of his words had moved her more than any elaborate speech could have. They had been building beautiful things together for months, not just the community center and their respective businesses, but a relationship based on mutual support, shared values, and the rare compatibility that comes from recognizing your complement in another person. Yes, she had replied without hesitation, understanding that she was not just accepting a marriage proposal, but embracing a partnership that would challenge both of them to become better versions of themselves. Tonight's celebration would serve multiple purposes beyond honoring the community center's continued success. Bruce had mentioned that he wanted to make an announcement during the evening's program, though he'd been mysteriously vague about details. Journey suspected he intended to publicly acknowledge their engagement, sharing their happiness with the community that had supported them through difficult months. She arrived at the community center 30 minutes before the official start time, wanting to help with final preparations. The building hummed with activity as volunteers arranged displays showcasing the year's achievements. Caterers prepared refreshments donated by local restaurants, and children from the after-school program practiced a performance they would present. Mama Rose, now 90, sat in the main gathering area, directing set-up activities with gentle authority. She wore a new dress in royal blue that Journey and Ailani had selected together, and her eyes sparkled with pride as she surveyed the bustling preparations. "Look what your love built, baby girl," she said when Journey approached for their customary greeting hug. "This place is alive in ways I never dared dream possible." "This is what your love built, Grandmama," Journey corrected. "Bruce and I just helped other people see what you'd been creating for 30 years. That young man of yours has something special planned for tonight," Mama Rose observed with a knowing smile. "I hope you're ready for it." Before Journey could ask for clarification, Bruce appeared beside them carrying a box of programs. He wore a dark suit that emphasized his tall frame and a tie she'd selected because its deep green brought out the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. The sight of him still made her heart skip in the way that had characterized their attraction from their very first meeting. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing her cheek with easy affection. "Ready for tonight?" "Ready for what exactly?" she asked, noting the anticipation in his expression. "You've been mysteriously excited about this for weeks." "You'll see," Bruce replied, his smile carrying secrets that made her simultaneously curious and slightly nervous. "Just trust me." As the formal program neared its conclusion, Bruce stepped to the podium with an expression that combined nervous excitement with profound happiness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded room, "tonight we celebrate 1 year of extraordinary growth and community impact. But I want to talk for a moment about what made this success possible." He paused, his gaze finding Journey in the crowd before continuing. 18 months ago, I met a remarkable woman who was fighting to save her grandmother's life work. I thought I was offering professional assistance for a worthy cause. What I discovered was a partner who challenged me to think bigger, dream broader, and commit more deeply to the work that gives life meaning. Journey felt her cheeks warming as she realized the direction his speech was taking, particularly when she noticed Ailani and Aurora moving strategically to positions where they could capture whatever was about to happen. "Journey Queen taught me that love is not something you fall into accidentally, but something you choose deliberately and defend courageously. She showed me that real partnership means supporting each other's growth rather than demanding conformity." Bruce stepped away from the podium, moving toward where Journey stood near the front of the gathered crowd. The room grew completely silent as people recognized they were witnessing something significant. 3 weeks ago, I asked Journey to marry me, and she said yes," Bruce announced, taking her hands as the crowd erupted in enthusiastic applause and cheers. "But tonight I want to ask her something else in front of all the people who have supported our love and our work." To Journey's complete surprise, Bruce knelt on one knee, pulling a second ring from his jacket pocket. Not an engagement ring, but a wedding band that matched the engagement ring she already wore. "Journey Queen," he said, his voice strong despite the emotion evident in his expression. Will you marry me tonight, here in the place where we found each other, surrounded by the community we love and the family we've chosen? The question took her breath away completely. Around them, she was dimly aware of excited murmurs and someone, probably Ailani, crying happy tears, but her attention focused entirely on Bruce's face and the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Tonight?" she managed to ask, though her heart was already providing the answer her mind was still processing. "I arranged for a minister to be here, and I have a license," Bruce explained, his confidence growing as he saw her expression shift from surprise to joy. "If you're ready, if this feels right, we can start our marriage in the same place where we started our love." Looking around the community center, at Mama Rose beaming with pride, at the children and families whose lives had been transformed by their collaborative efforts, at the friends and supporters who had stood by them through scandal and triumph, Journey understood that Bruce had chosen the perfect setting for their beginning as husband and wife. "Yes," she said, laughing through tears of pure happiness. "Yes, I want to marry you here, tonight, surrounded by everyone who matters to us." The wedding ceremony that followed was intimate and profound, officiated by Reverend Marcus Washington from the neighborhood church where Mama Rose had worshipped for 40 years. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to build something beautiful together, and to use their love as a force for positive change in the world. When Reverend Washington pronounced them husband and wife, the community center erupted in celebration that continued well past the planned conclusion of the evening. Children threw flower petals saved from the center's garden. Elderly volunteers shared stories of other couples they had watched find love, and donors who had initially questioned their relationship now offered toasts to the partnership they recognized as genuine and inspiring. As the evening wound down and guests gradually departed, Bruce and Journey found themselves alone in the reading corner, where children gathered every afternoon to hear stories about possibility and hope. Surrounded by books and comfortable cushions, holding each other in the soft light that filtered through windows facing the city beyond, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Mrs. Brando?" Bruce said, testing out her new name with obvious pleasure. "I like the sound of that," Journey replied, settling more comfortably against his shoulder. "Though I think I'll keep Queen professionally. Journey Queen Brando has a nice ring to it." "Whatever makes you happy," Bruce said, kissing the top of her head. "I just want to wake up every morning knowing I get to build a life with you." Outside their windows, the city sparkled with lights from windows where other families were ending their days, where other love stories were beginning or deepening or finding their way through challenges toward joy. Inside the community center that had brought them together, surrounded by evidence of what became possible when people chose to fight for what mattered, Journey and Bruce began their marriage with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have found your home in another person. The text message that had started everything, Ailani's urgent call for help at Mama Rose's house, had led not just to saving a community center, but to discovering that sometimes the best love stories begin with two people choosing to serve something larger than themselves and finding each other in the process. As they locked up the building and walked hand in hand toward their car, Journey carried with her the profound gratitude of someone who had learned that authentic love was worth every risk, every struggle, every moment of uncertainty that led to this perfect beginning.